This is crystals class. Will quickly, it's a pretty quick one. It's an hour one. Usually I teach much longer classes, but since you all got places to go, people to see, we'll do the most important part first. And so what we're going to talk about is, I'll talk about a little about my history and how I came to working with crystals and how I use them. Then we'll also talk about how to choose a crystal and what to do with it when you bring it home. I think that's the big part. And so I kind of fell into using crystals. It just kind of happened. My first experience was with making jewelry, such as not what you see on me now, but, you know, stringing, beading things. And it happened, it was actually, the reason it happened was kind of sad. My mom used to make jewelry, and she would make it from crystals and then also from like Swarovski and from glass, very pretty stuff. So I would always, whenever I come visit her, I'd steal stuff from her, you know. And so I had no need to make my own because there it was, you know, why bother? And then she passed away, and I saved all of her stuff and I boxed it up. I created it, and then a couple of things, they just kind of stayed with me. And so when I came home, I made a necklace, and I was hooked. And so my family's on the East Coast. I had my dad ship me the big container with all of her stuff, and that's how it started. And even though a lot of her inventory had glass things, I mainly found myself working with natural stones. And I found a lot of healing in that. I didn't expect it, but for some reason it was almost like my mom's creativity got put into me. And that was a great experience. I was obsessed with it for a couple of years. I have a lot of things that I made, and also I noticed that I would go through cycles in terms of which crystals I would use. So I have a summer collection, which I call it the summer collection, or the water collection, which is pearls and corals. And then I have the winter collection, which is the darker stones, like the dark blue one, lapis lazuli or malachite. So the darker one seems to be more, or like the jasper, my winter collection. And so that went on for some years, and I used to go to the Costa Mesa Gem Fair. Have you guys heard of that? Yeah, that's where you go for your supplies, good stuff. And then I started noticing that they're selling crystals there too, actual crystals, kind of like these. And so I bought some, and for a while they sat on my dresser collecting dust, and then it got too many, and then they ended up inside of my dresser. And then, I'm not quite sure what happened, but then they came out of the dresser, and I ended up with a couple of cases, curio cabinets, you know, the glass doors, the back mirror, and then I ended up with a bunch of shelves, and now they're everywhere. And so now I can't really use my dining room table. And then what I noticed a couple of things once all the crystals came into my house. One is the water started leaking, all the pipes started bursting. And part of it is the condo I live in, it's been built poorly, as you know, a lot of places in Orange County are. The water is corrosive, and also they use too thin copper. And so, but it just got to be ridiculous. We would get flooded several times a year by all neighbors and by ourselves. And this just continued. And one of the reasons that started happening, of course, you know, it's a timing of events, but there's no such thing as a coincidence. And so I think the crystals shifted the energy in our home, and things that needed to go had to go, and namely the pipes. And perhaps maybe the energy became more intense, so the calcium that was lodged in the pinholes and the pipes that got dislodged. Those of you who have had water trouble, you know what I'm talking about. Those little pinholes can cost $15,000. So we all changed our pipes. We're good now. Another thing we did with the crystals is in addition to having them inside, they're also outside. And they're strategically placed outside, so when you walk into my home, and we'll talk about it more as we get into individual crystals, as you walk into my home, you go through almost like a cleansing chamber. So I have some crystals that are absorbers, so whatever people are carrying with them, it gets absorbed into the crystals, and then I have some crystals that I call them bathers. They bathe you with white light. So whatever was not absorbed is going to be cleansed with the other crystals, and we'll talk about that as well. So to make the long story short, how I came about with working with crystals, it just happened. As I'm sure it's the same for many of you. Today I'm going to be talking about specific properties of crystals. Don't worry too much about remembering them. What I found is, you hear it, and then you remember something, then you look it up online, and then you forget, then you look it up online. So the way I learned all this I know about crystals is by repeating information, rereading and rereading, and also working. You cannot beat experience, because no matter what they say, and sometimes the information online is conflicting, certain crystals just don't work the way they're supposed to. They have opinions. And there's actually a funny story about opinion I'll tell you in a second, but something to keep in mind is we don't own crystals. Crystals are much older than us. We're their keepers. And it is often the crystals that pick us to be their keepers. So kind of like we don't own our children, we don't own our crystals. And you may end up with crystals in a weird way. You may go to Marshall's and there's one. You may go, I've got one at Mother's Market. I just picked it up and I was holding it like this and I was like, no, I can't put it down. Sometimes somebody will just randomly give you one. Sometimes it will be bequeathed to you. I mean, if they got to come to you, they'll come to you. And you can also call them in to come to you. If you believe or allow for the possibility of reincarnation, if you allow for the possibility that you've lived there before, chances are you've had relationships with other crystals. And so you can call them in, and they'll come into your life. And that's another funny thing that happens is when they're yours, they'll come to you at a time when you can afford them, and the price will be really cheap. I mean, it will be, or it may be expensive, but it's just something you got to do. So they'll come to you. And the way to call them in is just, you can do it here, sit in meditation, and literally call in the crystals that are yours to come find you. And they will.